Welcome to a Day in the Life video series from your therapy source with your host, Margaret Rice.
Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this new video series about a day in the life of people who work with kids, whether you might be a teacher, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a parent, a homeschool teacher. We're looking to talk to you just about your day-to-day routine and how you go about helping students. So our first interviewee is Mrs. P. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And why don't you just start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, sounds good. I am a middle school special education teacher. I think this, if I do my math right, is my 31st year.
Wow.
And yes, and I saw on America Has Talent, Got Talent this week, Simon Cowell was talking about a young woman and her voice was very seasoned for her age. So I think that's a good word to describe my educational experience. So let's just call me seasoned. And I work in the southeastern part of Wisconsin, and I'm in the middle school this year. And in the last few years, I've been supporting sixth grade. And that team has 5 teachers on it and amazing people. And my school is small, so our students' body is about 120 kids in that grade. And my caseload ranges from usually between 10 and 15 students.
And are you pushing into the classroom, or are they in your classroom as like a self-contained, what we call in New York State, a self-contained classroom, or are you pushing in?
We push in. Our building has really philosophically landed in a space where we meet kids where they are. So there are students that really need that special education space for a variety of reasons. So we have our own classrooms, but we really persist in keeping kids in that general education space with support.
Excellent, excellent. So more of an inclusion setting, a consultative model or is it team teaching?
We are on a block schedule, so our team teaching, co-teaching has diminished from the standpoint of the ability to be in classrooms for the entire time a classroom is running. So we've landed in really having the opportunity to be in there for specialized instruction because we've been co-planning ahead of time. So we use a co-plan, co-teach model, and we're team teaching in some spaces, usually with like small groups or students that are in the classroom in ELA and social studies and science and math.
Great. It sounds like an excellent model. And how would you say over the course of your career, some of the biggest changes you've seen in being a special education teacher?
I think when I first started teaching, I had my own classroom with my own group of students. And while that was wonderful and we really got to be close to each other, and when you have family dynamics, there's good and bad with that, correct? So there's this interesting space of having that ability, and you're really honing in on skills, working together to create relationships and team building. But really from the 30 years, we've gone, I think, educationally to really seeing the opportunity for kids to have that experience and the guidance of a general education teacher. And so the students really have transitioned from being in the space of with a special education teacher, perhaps all day long, to really being more with their peers. And that's probably the biggest change.
And you would say 100% that's a super positive change, or I don't
Yeah.
want to speak for you, but it sounds like that. Okay.
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay. Excellent. What would you say is the best thing about your job?
Best thing about my job is the kids. Their sixth graders are still funny and a bit wild and slightly naughty sometimes, and really still need you, but there's this level of independence and just maturity that isn't really present in other grades. I've taught different grade levels. So I love sixth grade. I love middle school. I just think it's an amazing experience to watch kids transform from, being these little sort of baby birds that come in and then they leave as eighth graders, so ready for high school, so mature, so have kind of found themselves in their independence. So definitely the kids.
Yeah, and I think that age range can be very hard for some people. So it's great that you found that's your love, that age. Middle school can be tough. What would you say is one of your best strategies to keep middle school students engaged? Because sometimes that can be difficult.
I think the best way to keep kids engaged is just to see them as individuals, to really put the locus of control back in their hands. Kids want to be like able to choose and advocate for themselves. And I think the more we provide opportunities for them to advocate and be able to show their independence with whatever dynamic learner you have in front of you, I think that's essential for middle school.
Would you say if you do provide accommodations or modifications for the students in the classroom, are you working towards them having ownership of that and independence with those?
For sure, the accommodations and modifications and supplementary aids that we try to do for kids, really, like anything that you can do to provide support for them where they're involved in their own understanding of their own behavior, I think is so empowering. So even just check-ins and check-outs, but making sure they're a part of that, that they have a voice. Very often you'll have kids advocate that they don't want you in their space and checking in with them. So just honoring ways to figure out how you do that without there being this big disruption. And really, kids will tell you, I need for you to do blank. And if it's possible, I believe we should be doing it.
That's excellent. Excellent, because that can be, again, another difficult thing in that age where, they want to have control, but you're saying you're using that to their strength. Am I correct in saying that
Yeah.
use
Yes.
that, let them be in control, which is an excellent strategy.
Yes.
What would you say maybe is your favorite success story that you've had with a student, without giving anything too specific, but do you have any super successful stories that you could share?
I have so many students and so many good memories. I wish that I'd started recording them in a way that captures their experiences and write a book, but I just haven't. So we'll live with the memories. I had a student who was a young man with autism, and I was supporting him as he transitioned into middle school. And I was working with him without really having a whole lot of opportunity to know what he knew. And he wasn't verbal necessarily very much. So we were having a conversation in writing, and it was a phone call. So I wrote on my paper, hello student, used his name, and he responded to me in this beautifully scripted writing. And I realized that I had a kid's book that was kind of sitting to the side of our workspace. And I looked over and I realized that the font that he was writing in was perfectly matched this book.
Wow.
And I was like, that is so cool. Like, how did you do that? And can you teach me how to do that? And so we began a conversation in that space. And I realized at some point, just in my head, that he was able to read what I was writing. And I asked him, hey, student, how did you learn how to read? And he said, I watched the script on the TV as it went. I think it was CNN, and he was watching the script, and that's how he taught himself how to read. And I said, well, how old were you? And he said, I was 2 or 3. So I just realized in that interaction with him that, wow, all the information and the power of his brain, and he really was in some ways so limited because he couldn't express it verbally like a neurotypical person, but he just empowered me to think about all kids like that, kids with behavior needs, kids with Down syndrome, kids with autism, kids with just sort of those classic other health impairment needs that might look like attention deficit, right? And I just thought, I can never assume that someone doesn't know something just because they haven't been able to show me in the traditional way. So I think he changed the trajectory of my special education teaching to go at it from that lens, versus you get a lot of information from people when you transition kids, like from one level to the next.
Right,
and very
right.
often it's the bad stories, right? Or the deficits, or the things that they've had challenges with through their elementary level. But very often kids come into middle school, it's a fresh start. It's a new building, it's new peers, it's a brand new team. They've matured, their bodies are physically growing. I think it's just so empowering to see kids in that, like to give them the grace to know that there could be some things that don't come with them, right? The baggage is
Right.
them. So
Mhm. Oh, that's an excellent success story. Especially that it changed the trajectory of how you taught from them then on. You know, it's so true how sometimes children teach us more than we're able to teach them, especially particular ones that you have throughout your career. I think we all can share stories of kids that changed the way we thought about what kids could achieve, because sometimes they do come in and with history, like you're saying, and rather than go based on that, form your own goals for them based on what you're seeing before them. Speaking of goals, how do you do with IEP writing in your state? Do you write the goals independently? Do you work with the student, the team? Is it all collectively written or more individualized?
with the district that I'm in, we actually have a process where we're included in all of the fifth grade IEPs coming into sixth grade. And so the ability to look at goals, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So the ability to look at goals and to think about our standards and transitioning from levels, we're included in the conversation with parents, students, the special education case manager sending the students to us, and those general education teachers at fifth grade. And then we would have a teacher able to be as part of that conversation as sixth grade. So it's really a collaborative approach to the IEP goals in general. And then we have, because we know the curriculum at the grade level that we're at, we're able to really bridge a good IEP goal from one year to the next when you're changing levels.
So you're saying in the late winter or spring of your students' fifth grade year, you guys are collaboratively meeting to formulate goals for when they arrive in sixth grade for those annual goals.
Correct. And our district is on not on a winter spring cycle, we're on a yearly cycle. So whenever their goals, whenever their IEP is due, we're included in that. So not only am I participating in all of the IEPs for my own caseload, I'm included in all of the fifth grade ones that would be coming to my building.
And you're saying their annual goal might end in December and
Correct.
not June.
Correct.
Okay, that's very different in New York State. Everything ends at the end of the school year. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about that and how you arrived at that system?
Sure. Our school district is small, but we have the ability to have a special education coordinator who works underneath the direction of our student services director. And that person really had a vision when they came in to look at us cohesively, not in silos, but as a system that saw kids as early childhood and then would graduate some students as they turned 21. So there was this conversation with special education teachers, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, physical therapists, all of the collective brain power in that group of people that really looked at kids coming from entering our school system and then exiting. We don't have a whole lot of turnover in our school system. So when kids move, they stay, or we're always part of our school district. So the voices at the table really advocated for there to be conversations continually happening so that we can move students progressively through a certain series of standards and see great growth as they go through our whole system. And so our special education coordinator really carved out time for that. They carved out sub coverage. They carved out the materials that you might need. They did their homework on what it looks like for if you need to have the essential element standards, and how you marry those with our standards for the certain content areas. And so it was really the work of one person hearing our vision and then executing it for us.
And how long have you been operating like this? It sounds amazing. How long have you been doing it this way?
That person has been in their position for 8 years.
Okay. And so do you feel that students progress quicker because you're constantly checking on those goals and maybe, fixing them or adapting them on the fly more than waiting until the next calendar school year?
I wouldn't say it's quicker. I would say that we're doing a better job of narrowing an IEP goal so that it's attainable, but it really is specifically written for a student. And then you're able to progress and monitor, and it gives you permission to meet and review or revise more than you might have in years past. So you have a student who perhaps who's struggling with something, and for years I thought, well, I can't talk about this until my annual IEP goal, right?
Right.
That isn't the case anymore. I feel empowered to go to my team and say, I just need 20 minutes. I want to talk about this. I want to show you my data. I want to have the student's voice present. And how can I do a better job with this particular goal or with this particular part of the goal? And it just
So
gives you flexibility to change it if you need to.
exactly. I mean, it sounds amazing. And then, so how are you're within your schedule? You said that they were able to build in planning time, and
Mhm.
how are you counting minutes or of service that you're providing for the student? And then versus these minutes where you guys are meeting as a team, just the
Mhm.
logistics of that. Because
Yeah.
again, that's not something I'm familiar with, but it sounds great. So maybe if other people wanted to do that, how are you fixing that schedule to work?
That's a great question. We've had, an interesting experience since COVID, especially with finding sub coverage. So the best possible way was outside of our school day with kids, and our system set up so that our high school starts first, and then our middle school starts 40 minutes later, and then our elementary schools start 40 minutes later. So there is a flexibility in time as far as the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And then otherwise, we really, we have a very strong special education team in my building. So I feel very empowered to go to my special ed teachers on my team. There are different grade levels, but I feel very flexible. And I know they do too. They ask me as well, like for coverage, could you please cover, this class or this lesson for me, or this check in and check out. And there's just a group of people that I go to.
Okay. So some of it also sounds like you work with a great group of people who are very collaborative and have a
Yes,
team approach. Okay.
very
So it's
much
not
so.
necessarily something in writing, or it's just you guys all pat each other on the back, help each other out to make sure that you're doing what's best for students, really, at the end of the day.
Sure. I think
How
it's
do
interesting. Let me just add one thing. I think it's interesting because people with maybe less experience or less ideal teams look at situations and think, well, I've just got one person I can ask. But in my building, it's kind of a triage approach where we have the student services team. My principal is amazing, and she's really given us permission to think outside of who you might traditionally ask for help. So if you have paraprofessional support, or if you have your special ed teachers, so even asking the custodian down the hall, his room is clear next to mine. He'll come if he hears something and it sounds like it's not the typical, noise coming from my room, and ask, do you need help? Or there's the lunch ladies who know that I need a vegetarian pizza set aside for one of my students, and I don't even have to go anymore. Like, they just do
they
it,
know?
right? There's an amazing group of people in my building that just cover everyone's needs. I've never worked in a building that's been like this.
And do you feel that you were able to do that because of the way you guys have set up this collaborative effort, or it's just the group of people that work there, or a little bit of both?
I think it's both. It's
Okay.
just hard work, and it's really like going back in the softest way and just saying, this is what's best for this kid. Like this is what I want, but it's what's best for the student. And there's so many people that are so responsive when you make it about the kids. So
And you mentioned about progress monitoring. How do you collect data? to see how the students are doing towards their goals?
So some people would call me old school. I still have my clipboard. You'll see me in spaces with my clipboard, and then kids are like, "What are you doing?" I've definitely transitioned to technology. I think of myself as a techie person, even though I'm seasoned. So I use an iPad, and I have a couple of apps that I use, but really we've transitioned to and use Google as part of our school system and Canvas. So I've tried to merge both of those. So I might traditionally be in a classroom space and have something on a clipboard, and then I go right away and transition it to something that's technology based. And then we use Google spreadsheets to be able to set up charts and graphs to show at that point for parents.
Now, speaking of parents, how are you reporting on those goals? When are you required to report on them at a certain time? For us, it's quarterly, but your quarters might all be at different times. So does it get confusing?
Right, it does kind of get confusing. You have to keep track of it all. I report out, well, in some cases, I report out daily if there's something that really is a check-in and check-out system as far as behavior, for example, all the way to quarterly, like you say, and then certainly at our annual IEP time.
Okay. So if you're reporting quarterly, you're just reporting where they are towards that goal, even if the goal might be ending in a month.
Yes.
Okay. So that
it's
makes
really
sense.
the system is set up. We have Oasis as our software system. So we actually use like no progress, some progress, met or exceeds, right? So you
Okay.
have the ability to, but then in my notes, I would put, the specific benchmarks, and then you can see, because archived, where you were the last quarter.
Okay. Now you've mentioned quite a few times check in, check out. Can you expand upon what that actually looks like?
Sure. So if a student really needs some support transitioning into our building, we have a check-in, check-out system that's really, they're assigned to a person, and that individual would just go and either put their eyes on a student, or they would actually engage with the student, just to kind of, with those soft skills of seeing how a student's coming into the building. And then we also have students who need that sort of support transitioning from class to class. And we might have students that need it in classroom spaces when they're transitioning from something like guided instruction to independent work. So the check-ins, check-out system is pretty kid specific. And we have set up some Google forms for that to track what we do. And sometimes it's a scale, like a 1 to 4 scale. And that's really based on zones of regulation. So you might come in, and be in a certain space, and then you just want to see kids flex so that they're able to manage the learning environment.
And how many kids then, number wise, are you responsible to be that check-in person for? Or does it vary, or?
Definitely varies. I think this
Okay.
coming year, I have 4 kids that I'm checking in with in the mornings, and I have 2 that need support getting out of the building.
Okay. And this is only for children who have special needs. It's not for the general education students who get the check in and the check out.
In my building, we have some universal systems in place for kids, because we're a PBIS school. So in that space, there are students that have check-in, check-outs, and it is a variety of individuals. So our social and emotional learning coach, our guidance counselor, we have an AVID coordinator. She will check in with kids if that's needed. We have a math specialist and a reading specialist in my building. Both of those individuals have students that they check in and check out. So I would say, and our general education teachers, like, just have they have good relationships with kids. So there are kids that we do have other plans for, whether it's health plans or 504s, or just maybe there's a student whose family's in crisis in the moment, and we have you have a check-in and check-out system, but you might fade that.
Wow, I'm very, very impressed. It sounds like you have an amazing district, work with an amazing team. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up? This has been really exciting. You're fun to kick off this first interview, that's for sure.
Well,
it's going to be hard to follow in your footsteps.
Oh no, you'll have fabulous people. I just have a question maybe for you. I'm wondering, I have a student with Down syndrome who's coming to me from 5th grade, and really I was curious, maybe at some point you can think about this question. I just am wondering, how can special education teachers really support or teach those foundational OT skills for students that are entering the middle school? I'm thinking about students that might physically have grown, and you might have worked on handwriting or opening something as an OT when they were little. And then that transitioned into other things as kids progress through the grade levels. But I'm so curious. I have a student who has Down syndrome, who's coming, and that student has some very significant peer awareness skills right now. And that student is also matured, so they're physically growing. I'm so curious how I can look at those foundational skills and foster independence with him, and then have the ability without any formal training, right? And I use your resources on your therapy source. That I use a lot of the free resources just because I want to supplement what's happening in the OT sessions. But I'm really curious how I can do it as a special education teacher.
I'm actually a physical therapist, but I'll answer the question with the same
Yeah,
mindset.
that sounds good.
I think one of the biggest things that you can do, it sounds like you have very supportive staff. Ask your OT or PT in your building
Okay.
to kind of take a look at what you have in the classroom, what things you could be using there. I think sometimes as kids get older, some of the best strategies are environmental modifications and changing maybe the tool they're using or how they're using it, their positioning. You might not be able to change their foundational motor skills exactly how they're doing something, because that just might be the makeup of how they are neurologically and
Mhm.
strength wise. And not to say you can't make improvements in that, of course you can, but for certain skills you might have better success modifying the environment or providing adaptations either through technology or different tools for that student to be able to access the curriculum as they get older. So sometimes that might be a better perspective to look at it. Again, there's lots of activity-based interventions you could do, like you're saying, to specifically practice on different skills. Perhaps it's cutting or handwriting. And I would definitely reach out to the people in your building who know what you're using, or curriculums too. You mentioned you're using zones of regulation and PBIS, and I don't know if they're using a specific handwriting curriculum, things of that nature. They might be able to better guide you exactly how to do it on a day-to-day basis. But overall, my answer is, as they get older, environmental modifications, adapting the tools they're using may be a better approach rather than continuing to work on a small skill that it just may never be a skill that they're going to have, and that you use something else to achieve that goal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
does. Definitely.
Um, so I think this was great. I really
Okay.
do. I'm so glad you joined us.
Thank you very
Um,
much.
yeah, and hopefully you're able to check in for the rest of the series.
That sounds
So,
perfect. I definitely will. All
all right, great. Appreciate
right.
it. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Have a great
All right.
summer.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining your therapy source for this Day in the Life series hosted by Margaret Rice. Visit yourtherapysource.com for more information to help students succeed.